And so that's always been the mindset of the IT professional is lock down, isolate, isolate. But in the AV world, it's open, flood, communicate, try to get these systems to cohabitate so that you can change channels really quickly. And that's the big difference. So it's more of like AV's mindset and idealism coming into the IT world and kind of impacting the IT world.
Welcome back to Signal Flow. I am your host for today, Ben Thomas. You know, one of the conversations that we hear regularly in our AV community, especially as a lot of IT-minded folks find their way into the industry, is how do I manage video distribution and bandwidth, not only from things like digital signage and even, you know, bandwidth, but even from a broadcast and video distribution standpoint externally. So I wanted to have a conversation today that sort of centers around that. So I brought on a couple of folks who can really help dig in a little bit deeper, not only on some of the standardization and best practices from a video distribution and broadcast standpoint, but also get into the weeds from things like partitioning and best practices for network allocation and things like that. And so we've brought on a couple of guests today that I'm really excited to have on and have that conversation with. And that's Todd Musgrave and Alex Pendleton, both folks from Netgear. Alex and Todd, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Appreciate you
Absolutely.
having us.
Well, Alex, I want to kind of kick you the first question, and I want to level set, right? You know, I think a lot of IT folks are familiar with things like device management and allocation and kind of partitions, but maybe less from a broadcast and video distribution side of things, whether that's internal, sending signals across NDI, or even external, right? Broadcasting, you know, via RTMP protocols and things like that, or even receiving some of those signals. But I want to ask at a high level, you know, the world of broadcast is so dramatically impacted by that world of IT. Where sort of are we in that life cycle of kind of IT convergence into the world of broadcast and video distribution?
Actually, I go the opposite to that. I would say that the IT industry is being impacted from the AV industry because isolating those networks away from the IT infrastructure is what needs to be the focus. They're separate networks, they're separate signals. I had a discussion with a gentleman a few months ago at the NAB a conference that, you know, he talked about, well, it's a larger broadcast domain. He's like, what are you doing? Like, why do you have such a large broadcast domain? And that's because it's not a broadcast domain, it's a multicast domain, which is very similar to a broadcast domain, but it uses a software system, IGMP, to be able to organize that and flood that correctly. And you need to allow for that openness to allow for that system to work really, really well together. There's ways of isolating it, and that's where the IT mindset comes in, because if you look at the way IT systems have been built in the past, it's like sales can talk to finance and marketing can talk to finance, but sales and marketing can't discuss it, or something like that. They want to isolate that information and come up with solutions on how to make that communication even redundant in ways. And so that's always been the mindset of the IT professional is lock down, isolate, isolate. But in the AV world, it's open, flood, communicate, try to get these systems to cohabitate so that you can change channels really quickly. And that's the big difference. So it's more of like AV's mindset and idealism coming into the IT world and kind of impacting the IT world.
I agree with you, Alex. That's a great point. And Todd, you know, I want to ask, as somebody who's been in the industry for a while and you've seen transitions from, you know, standardized cabling, whether that's BNC, SDI, through kind of these network-centric protocols, I think in large, at least this is my opinion, is that the larger broadcasters have done a good job kind of finding that transition out, right? But where the sweet spot is, and where I know Netgear sits a lot too, is in that small, medium, even kind of pseudo large company that may not be a traditional broadcaster, right? But they're having to have conversations about, hey, I want to put studios inside my office. I want to start podcasting. I want to do all these things. You know, how do you see that market continuing to evolve from a broadcast and video distribution standpoint versus maybe even, we'll call it pre-COVID?
Right. Well, I mean, we get these every day, all day, and all different verticals. With our larger switches, 10, 25 gig, 100 gig, we're starting to get in the medium to larger type of broadcasting. But really, that medium to small is kind of the sweet spot, as you mentioned. It's really getting people to come over from STI workflows, HDMI workflows, over to the IT/IP side is very challenging. People want low latency, obviously. They want lossless video. They want all of the time sync that SDI with Genlock and tri-level sync used to offer. But as all these things are being offered through AV over IP and broadcast over IP, especially with the adoption of 2110, I think the price of 2110 has come down quite a bit. And to be able to incorporate that in smaller to medium budgets, it's today's the day. It's happening now.
I'm interested, right? Because my thought, so obviously, Todd, you've got a fantastic background in the world of broadcast and kind of in that NAB community. I started and kind of cut my teeth there as well, but I see this, transition, like Alex said, a little bit more from the AV side of the world where, 2110 is something new to a lot of these folks, where you've got sort of these rival factions who are competing for almost the attention of the manufacturers and service providers saying, hey, I'm looking for this. I don't know how to achieve it, but I'm coming from the idea of, hey, I've already got network infrastructure. I probably don't have the bandwidth and switching capabilities, but I want to come in and increase my standard. Alex, from the perspective of maybe people coming into it for the first time, what are some of those challenges, right? Do they know that they should worry about Genlock and sync and even small stuff like tallies, right? Are those conversations that they're having, or are those things that folks like Todd and the established broadcast pros have to kind of come in and teach on the back end?
Oh yeah, it's a learning curve. They need to have professionals that have worked in this industry for a long time to come in and at least have some kind of explanation of how these systems will be implemented from a control, from an output perspective. The network infrastructure portion, which is what your IT sysadmins are going to be most focused on, is a relatively small part, right? It's like the UPS driver delivering the packages from Amazon, right? That's the network infrastructure. But where the magic happens is in the control systems, in the gateways, in all of the endpoints that are going to send images, the management systems like the Panasonic Keros, all of those types of items really require deep understanding. So you definitely need to have someone that is a professional. I'd like to point out too, just a little bit about what Todd was talking about. So when you're talking about large corporations, right, it's no longer just cubicles and conference rooms. We did a installation in San Francisco recently that has the exact same size Riedel system for game presentation, they call it, which is like all of the microphones and all of the stuff that they need to communicate to the director's box, to the field in like NFL football games in the space that is the headquarter of this company. Why they need that, I don't know, but it's the same size as the one that was used at the Super Bowl. So interestingly enough, that's the level of idea that's happening right now. That's the merging that's happening. But again, like I say, keep those things separate. Keep the AV system away from your IT system, because those things will, the standardization of all of these IGMP, all of the PTP, all of the things that are happening in these networks can inflict some scenarios that you have to be aware of in this integration.
Well, and Todd, I want to follow up on that and really ask from the other perspective, right? Where, you've obviously got folks on the opposite end of the world that say, hey, we know IT, how do we kind of incorporate those broadcast principles and kind of keep our infrastructure? But you've got that alternate side of the world where, you have those SDI hardcore folks and that are maybe a little bit more reluctant to adapt a lot of those IP technologies for one reason or another, right? There's really, really positive and high quality arguments to say, look, I like my infrastructure cabled a specific way. I like it to be off network because it allows me certain freedoms. Have you seen, hopefully less lately, but have you seen a lot of reluctance to adapt to a lot of those IT-centric workflows, especially as a primary source of distribution?
I think honestly, during the pandemic, people had to get very familiar with these workflows, and also and we see applications of all sizes. Alex alluded to the Super Bowl, but also corporate networks, the likes of LinkedIn, Facebook. These people are doing interviews and creating content from offices all over the world, right? So they have to implement some sort of AV over IP and certainly with some kind of time sync that is done in different ways with different flavors of compression. But I think also is what's very unique, the likes of Ross, VizRT, and others allow you to have a hybrid network. So you can still bring in those SDI workflows, HDMI workflows, and also incorporate an element to get familiar with the AV over IP side of things, right? So I think adoption is moving very fast, but to having the ability to have both in the workflow and a hybrid system, you don't just jump completely. You put your toes in the pool first, right? And then you get up to your knees and your waist, and it's available and it's capable with the endpoints. Now, one thing about us is we're kind of I would say the glue, or it's been some of our colleagues call it the plumbing, right? So we love all the compression rates. We love all of the codecs. And we have up to, I think now, over 300 interop partners. So it's very advantageous for us to make sure everything works over our system. So that's how we come from it. But we see applications of all sizes, and corporations, house of worship, broadcast. Some of the AV stuff looks like broadcast, and some of the broadcast stuff looks like AV.
Well, you're right. There's, I'm kind of sick of the word convergence, I guess, but there is this natural convergence and a really blurred line between, hey, where does AV and broadcast intersect, and where does one start and the other begin, right? Because a lot of people are trying to build things on top of existing networks, and in the inverse, people have existing ecosystems and that are trying to move towards the IP side of thing. But Alex, one of the questions that I have, and this has continued to be one of our battles in the AV community, whether or not a lot of the AV purists want to include broadcast in that or not, but there are pretty dramatically disparate standards and protocols, right? On the quote unquote broadcast side of the world, you've got your NDIs, your 2110s, you've got sort of all the IP protocols there. But then on the other side of the house, you specifically on the AV over IP side of things, you've got things like IPMX, and there's this sort of weird line, and I guess never the two shall meet. But how do you kind of create some education and at least just awareness across some of those protocols, especially as people are saying, hey, I come from this world of AV, I want everything to be IPMX and controlled over this way. And then you've got folks on the other side that swear by 2110. How do you find the balance there?
It's tough, especially I think the best, we're getting down to really two types. You have fully compressed or mostly compressed, and then you have your uncompressed environments, and that's literally the difference between AV and broadcast now. Even the SDVOE, which is traditionally a AV deployment or AV standard, is actually encroaching on some of the broadcast stuff that we've seen into our Pro AV design team, which is the team I manage here in North America. And so we actually are seeing kind of even just some of those AV standards that do offer a very good light compressed communication for the video standards or for audio, even USB control for kind of light command and control. You are seeing that still kind of go into the broadcast scenarios. The cinema truck that we did for NAB, that truck is designed to be like a movie production studio mobily. And it's not just going to be a broadcast capable system. It has to have a lot of AV, has to have a lot of audio AV in it. And then also Wi-Fi, which is another whole scenario that is coming into the space as well, because it's traditionally been cable. It is starting to be blurred a little bit, the line between the two. Delineating between one or the other is really starting to become more of a preference. Do you want to deal with raw? Do you like the way that the colorization happens with the raw output uncompressed video? Are you okay with the delay and the latency that comes with a fully compressed or mostly compressed communication? So those are the types of things that happen in the design phase of a lot of these builds.
Well, and you've even got, this is more apparent than ever. It shows like Infocom too, where you've got folks like camera manufacturers who haven't even historically had conversations about the world of broadcast because they're focused on healthcare and low latency distribution for, even security is a good example, right? Where everything's kind of been IP for a long time, but there's sort of been this demand, Todd, like you mentioned, for accessibility and crossover and all these different flexibilities. And Todd, I want to ask, as someone who really has been on the manufacturing side of the broadcast world for a while, how important is it to have kind of that cross compatibility, right? Whether it's, whether it's building a camera that is NDI capable, or whether it's building, a switch that can do IPMX, it could do 2110, it could do all these different protocols. How important is it to have some of those devices that are interoperable, especially as we expand into different verticals?
It's huge, really, because you mentioned IPMX. So the way I look at IPMX is kind of a bridge to SMPTE 2110, right? Because IPMX can be used, PTP and IPMX can be used or not used. There is uncompressed versions of IPMX and there's slightly compressed. So it's always important to have a bridge to the new technology. And we see it with a lot of broadcast switching equipment that we partner with. So and you also saw it in SDI land too. It's not uncommon, like 3G SDI, right? We had level A and level B 3G SDI, right? And so level B was really meant to help people move over to the 3G SDI. And you see that also with 12G, 12G SDI, you had two connections.
We won't have a conversation about 12G SDI here today.
We don't have that Alex with the SDI stuff, right? So,
it's all good here because like I say, they run the cable, and you said earlier that those people are kind of afraid to go to the IT standards for like SMPTE and over the IP standards, but they make a lot of money running those cables, So like the people that are running those SDI flows are they're also in there making their own.
Yeah, you got to train them for new jobs, right?
Exactly. So
cable is cable. That's not true at all, actually.
Oh, but that's so not true.
I'll get booed out of the room if I say that and actually mean that. Alex, one of the concerns too in the conversations, I even sort of hate to bring this up, right? But IT-centric workflows, the biggest threat continues to be cybersecurity, right? 100%. And you've got these folks. Now, the good thing I would say about the world of IT is that normally the thought process for them starts not them, but IT professionals starts there, where it's about device management, it's about security, familiar with VPN workflows, things like that. But as you add some of those disparate sources, whether it's coming in via RTMP or SRT, whatever inbound workflows, or some of those internal workflows, whether you're sending signal via NDI or whatever, there is a large risk for whether it be hacking or compromisation. How should you have that conversation as somebody who's kind of finding ways to build some of those video distribution workflows into that existing IT infrastructure?
Yeah, interestingly enough, we when we were doing the cinema truck, the Lavo gentleman was one of a CCIP security professional, and was also a Juniper as well. And that was a big question for him and his systems. And so they've started to support a lot of the standards. And there's tons of standards out there. And I think we need to move towards, I don't think there's enough adoption of IT standards in the AV world that support cybersecurity protections. It's always going to be a concern. You're never not working in that environment. You're always on the clock to make sure that those things are secure. You need to be able to have systems that can lock down ports so they can't be accepted on switches. You also need to have devices that have zero trust authentication that can go through to set up their authentication into the network. Radius authentication is 802.1x is being supported by a variety of AV manufacturers and broadcast manufacturers out there. Those are all really important things to do, and standard-based items that you can deploy, and a lot of IT professionals have done that. The TACAX authentication is another item for management from IT professionals into these systems. So we need to look as a group in the AV industry, and we need to adapt to what has already been placed in these IT environments to help with that kind of problem. So it's an evolving landscape. Really, it is. You'll constantly be working.
Yeah, I will say our CTO signed the CISA Secure by Design pledge at the RSA conference. So we're very much dedicated to security. Obviously, with broadcast, the content is invaluable, right? And when you have content in the cloud, and people are contributing to post-production, or they're producing it in separate ways, like you saw for the Super Bowl, right? You had a version of the programming on Nickelodeon, and on Bikini Bottom, and then you had the regular broadcast and other broadcast flavors. So that's becoming more and more important, obviously.
Well, Todd, I want to follow up on that, right? So I was sort of laughing to myself as Alex was talking, because I guarantee you there might be a few broadcast first people who sort of their eyes rolled back in their head and sort of glazed over a little bit there. But it's important to have those conversations, Alex, because as somebody who's more worried about almost the point-to-point video distribution side of things, you're not always worried about, this is a compromised signal on a potentially compromised network. But Todd, you talked about that CISA pledge. And, manufacturers in general are having to take more ownership of that, right? Whether it's training, whether it's, product development, things like that. What would you say from a manufacturer perspective are some of the concerns and some of the ways really that you guys are even heading off some of those cybersecurity conversations to better serve not only the end users, but even the integrator partners?
Well, I might kick that over to Alex, because he certainly has a better mind for what this looks like in our development pipeline. But we're definitely dedicated to it. We know it's important, and it's going to become even more important as people put their entire workflows maybe into the cloud or have it accessible by bad actors, let's just say.
Yeah, like I say, it's a balance. You got to constantly look at what is out there and then be adjustable. But as the network infrastructure, we can only support what the endpoint supports. We can lock anything down. We can be as restrictive as possible, and we have a full deployment of enterprise suites for security to process these types of functionalities. The scenario that happens is if the endpoint doesn't support it, then it's not going to get to where it needs to go. So it's really a balancing act for the broadcast standards that are out there, and for the AV side of things as well.
Well, look, I want to give you guys one last question before we wrap here, and this is more centered towards folks kind of finding their way into the IT conversation for the first time. I'm going to ask kind of from each perspective. Todd, I'm going to ask you about kind of people that come from the broadcast side of things. Where do they start having those IT conversations? And Alex, the inverse side of things. But Todd, I want to start, right? Folks like us who started in the world of broadcast, who have to learn best practices about IT and cybersecurity. How do you recommend people starting those conversations for the first time, or where do you recommend that people go maybe to find some resources or ask questions?
Well, next week at the big show, the Infocom show, they're going to see a lot of. I think probably dipping into a hybrid system, and there's really. It ranges in price, so there's very affordable options, even software-driven only options, right? That you see, like vMix and some things like this. But really learn the basics. We have what's called Netgear Academy, and it's a free course, and we provide a VIXA credit on our website. We do a lot of trainings worldwide. We were at the Crestron Masters, and Alex did an amazing presentation at the Crestron Masters. But we're doing more and more and more education. And the more we do, the more we get asked. And we start off all of it with basic AV over IP terminology concepts. So we start small, and then even as involved as maybe getting hands-on switches and onboarding them and learning how to manage them in our user interface. But in general ways, we believe very heavily in education, and a lot of it can be found online, and a lot of partners out there that will help.
Well, and Alex, you might get the tougher end of the stick here on this question. How do you start that conversation from somebody who's a little bit more IT centric? Is the first conversation about the rule of thirds? Should you start there, or should it be something a little bit more basic that they're more familiar with to chew? And how do you find those baby steps into getting into the world of the broadcast for folks who have started in that world of IT?
Yeah, you got to really introduce yourself first, because I've worked with so many AV integrators over the last 6 years that it didn't find out who the IT person that would be involved in the integration of the network until the very last days of handing over the keys. The conversation needs to start early. You need to be aggressive. I think it's important that the IT professional on-prem know exactly how this system is going to be integrated, if it's going to be isolated, air-gapped. These are all things that need to have the discussion. When I do my trainings, I throw up a little slide called the IT guy, and it's a picture of the Simpsons comic book guy, because it's like that's the guy from the IT world. He's got a nice system that he's built that he's been running, he or she, and they don't want to have any of those infringements coming in, and they need to know what the ramifications of those systems in the corporate environments, right? So yeah, definitely need to have those conversations. A lot of the AV over IP world is still growing, evolving, brand new, and they may not understand the full language that's coming from the IT on-prem sysadmins and professionals that will be involved in managing the system. So having that conversation early prevents the telephone effect of the he said, she said, or there's a new network coming in, I didn't know about that. Like, it prevents all of that, and allows for everybody to have that conversation. Our
And
Pro AV design
separate.
team. Yeah, our Pro AV design team, the communication that comes in, we always ask to be involved in those conversations. I can give you a quick example. When we did one with NYU, they were doing something that had a proprietary communication for network access control for the corporate system that they were running. And, we needed to adapt to a solution to get the AV system to integrate with that. And we were able to have that conversation once everyone was in the same room. But we had to deal with the telephone effect for 3 months of, well, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. So rather than do that, let's be solutions oriented and start early.
Well, hey, if nothing else, our conversation today, I think, really properly identifies the fact that it's important for people to, whether it's attend events like InfoComm, whether it's to have conversations cross-organization, whether it's just to do some basic research and watch YouTube videos, right? I think there's so much education that has to happen, and that's where the discrepancy, I think, is for a lot of people who try and find their way from one side of the world to the other, or vice versa. But I'll tell you what, this is a great place for us to start today, and I appreciate you both of you coming on the show today. And I'm sure we'll have another episode of this where we might get a little bit more into the technical weeds of things. But it's important for us to have this conversation because we've got so many people from different disciplines and understandings of both the broadcast world and the IT delivery world. So I thank you both for coming on today and spending some time with us.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in. If you have any more questions, find these wonderful gentlemen on LinkedIn. They can help answer any questions you might have. If not, they could probably refer you to somebody who might know. But hey, thanks so much again for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Signal Flow.
The only thing people want to talk about today is this Clark.